We got up to Daf Beis Amud Beis, and the Mishnah says on the top of the line, top line of the page, "V'eshes achiv shlo haya ba'olam," and we're talking about the case of Levi who's born after the Nefilah for Yibum. So you have two brothers, and they're alive simultaneously, both Reuben and Shimon. They share the same life, same time on this earth. And Reuben marries Sarah in this case. Reuben dies without any children, and Sarah falls for Yibum to Shimon. At this point, there's only one brother, Shimon. So the wife of Reuben could only fall for Yibum to Shimon. But then Levi is born. Now Levi is B'olam Achas, he's alive together with Shimon, but not with Reuven. Now, Shimon could be B'Yavim, the wife of Reuven after Reuven's death, because they had what's called the Yeshiva Achas, but Olamam, they lived together at the same time, but not Levi, as we said. Now, if Shimon is B'Yavim, the wife of Reuven, after Reuven's death, and he marries another woman, we'll call her Rivka, and then Shimon dies, then even though Shimon and Levi lived together, they had a yeshiva achas ba'olam, nevertheless, both the wives of Shimon will not fall for Yibum to Levi. Now, let's count one by one. In the case of Sarah, who is the wife of Reuven, the late Reuven, she doesn't fall for Yibum to Levi because Levi was not alive at the time of Reuven. Reuven and Levi did not share the same Olam Achas. She, therefore, Sarah, the wife of Reuven, becomes what's called an Iser Eshes Ach Shelo B'Makom Mitzvah. In other words, vis-a-vis Levi, Sarah, the wife of Reuven, since she doesn't fall for Yibum to Levi because he wasn't alive during the lifetime of Reuven, this woman, Sarah, who was married to Levi's brother Reuven, is now Eshes Achiv. So that now if Shimon has another wife, in addition to the wife that he was Miyavim of Reuven, that other wife, we called her Rivka, she would not fall for Yibum to Levi either because she's a Sarah of an erva called Eshes Ach. And finally, the last case in our Mishnah of the 15 cases is Vikalosa. So kaloso means that let's say we'll call him Yitzchak. Yitzchak is the son of Reuven, and he marries Rivka, and Yitzchak dies. So Yitzchak, the son of Reuven, married to Rivka, dies, and Rivka now marries Shimon, the brother of Reuven. So when Shimon, Reuven's brother, marries Rivka, Rivka now is, if let's say Shimon has another wife besides Rivka, let's call her Leah, if Shimon dies now without children, then Leah is Ptura Michalitzel Yibum vis-a-vis Reuven, because she is an Iser Erev of Kalasa as a result of the original marriage to his son Yitzchak. So again, Reuven is the father of Yitzchak, and therefore when Yitzchak marries Rivka, Rivka becomes Kalaso of Reuven, correct? That's Reuven's daughter-in-law. And later on, if Rivka marries his brother, Shimon, and has another wife, so then when Shimon dies, the wife of Shimon, namely Rivka, who's the daughter-in-law of Reuven, is Aser B'Iser Erva to Reuven as a kaloso, and now Shimon's other wife also is excluded from Yibum under the law of Soras Erev. And then the Mishnah says, Harelu Pochos Soraseim, B'tzor Soraseim, and Achalitzim Yibum ad Olam. Okay, fine. Now let's fast forward to the Gemara. Gemara is about 8 lines up before the end of Daf Beis Amid Beis. And the Gemara says the following. This Gemara is focused on the sequence of the Mishnah, of the 15 arayos listed in the Mishnah. And the Mishnah begins with Bito, correct? And then from Bito and all the relatives of Bito, it goes on to Chamboso. And at the end of Beis Amud Aleph, you have the case of Achos Ishta. And the Gemara is very concerned about the problem of the Achos Ishta being so late in the Mishnah. Michte, if I had my druthers, says the Makshin in the Gemara, I would have put Achos Isha not towards the end of the list, but rather first on the list. Why would I give Zchut Kdima to Achos Isha? Kulu, all the arayos, me'achos Isha yalfinam. Where does the Torah tell me, in what context, regarding which erva, that an erva does not fall for Yibum? She's excluded from Yibum. It's in the parsha of Achos Isha. So in other words, when Reuven and Shimon marry 2 sisters, and Shimon dies, then Shimon's wife does not fall for Yibum to Reuven because she is Reuven's wife's sister. And the pasuk is in Vayikra Yudches, and it says V'yishal achosa lo sikach, and that establishes the erev of Achos Isha. But then it says Litzvar legalos ervasa oleha b'chayeha. And the Gemara later on in Daf Gimel Amud Beis is going to focus on the word oleha, as if to say that the Torah is expanding the Iser Erva of Achos Isha beyond the case of Achos Isha, this classic case, simple case of Achos Isha. And the word Alea is a code word for a Yibum situation. Why is that so? Because if we fast forward from Vayikra Yudches to Dvarim Chafei in Parshas Kiteitzei is the Parsha of Yibum. There it says Yevamah Yavo Aleha. So the same word Aleha appears in 2 different contexts. Once in the context of the erev of Achos Isha, and second in the context of Yibum. And therefore we take the context of Yibum of Aleha and we put it back into the Parsha of Lo Tikach. And the Torah is saying Lo Tikach, you should not marry the sister of your wife, even in a case of Yibum. Even when your brother Shimon was married to this woman who's the sister of your wife and died without children, you cannot marry the sister of your wife. And that tells me that the erev of Achos Isha does not fall for Yibum, again, because the Torah in the parsha of the erev of Achos Isha says Oleha, and in the parsha of Yibum says Oleha. So we take the context and the scenario of Oleha in Yibum and we graft it, so to speak, and frame it onto the Achos Isha, the Erva parsha in Vayikra Yudches, to tell you that lo sikach, the Torah is enjoining you from marrying the sister of your wife, even in a situation of you. Even when it's Yavama, Yavo Alea, but here it's lo tikach. And the Gemara tells us here that Kulu me'achos isha yalfina. That achos isha is not the exception, but rather the rule. From achos isha, we're going to derive the conclusion that all arayos do not fall for you. And this is a Gemara later on at Daf Ches. So we have three Gemaras here. We have Agmar Daf Beis, we have the Gemara Daf Gimel that derives Oleha, that in Achos Isha there's no Yibum. And now we have the Gemara Daf Ches that derives from a Hekesh that all arayos are equated to each other. And if all arayos are prohibited, even in a scenario of Yibum, if one of the various arayos is prohibited in Yibum, then all the arayos are prohibited in Yibum, because there's a Hekesh in which we integrate all the arayos together. That's a Sunya Daf Ches. So the Gemara says, "Lisne achos isha bareisha." We should get a sort of like a premier position to achos isha, because everything that's in our Mishnah is derived from achos isha. Now, it seems to be that the Gemara's question is what I would call pure intuitive logic. What do I mean? I don't think the Gemara here is pulling rank with some sort of principle by which we analyze a Mishnah, or what are the literary guidelines when Rebbe edits the Mishnah. Later on, the Gemara, I think, is going to go down that pathway. There's certain rules and regulations, one of which is, for example, if there's a list of Isurim, we always start with the more Chomer Isur. That's a rule which guides Rebbe in the way he presents and formulates the Mishnah. But now I think the Gemara is just simply offering that which is intuitively logical, that if you derive Y from X, it makes sense to start with X and then teach me Y, because Y is only derived from X. The halacha that arayos are not included in Yibum, we would not know, because the Torah is matereshus ach. Maybe the Torah, for the sake of Yibum, lahakim shem zer liachim, would be mater all the arayos. So now we need the Yalfusa, and that Yalfusa derives from achos ishto. So first tell me achos ishto, and then tell me the derivatives of achos ishto. That's, I think, the underlying premise of this Gemara. There's going to be another methodological principle by which Rebbe is guiding when he formulates the Mishnah, and that's called midrasha chavivole. That which we derive from a Torah Shebal Peh is always considered more chaviv. And that'll always come first on the list. So we have various rules and regulations by which we are guided in setting up the sequence in the Mishnah. Now, this interpretation of the Gemara, the Kasha of the Gemara, the underlying premise of the Gemara, is not so simple. As we'll see as we go along. The Gemara says for Chitema, perhaps there's another rule which, let's call it a technical rule in how to teach Torah Shebal Peh, that guides Rebbe in the sequence of the Mishnah, and that rule overrides the intuitive logical rule of start with the Malamed and then go on to the Nilma. Start with the paradigmic case, which teaches us other cases. What is that second rule? Maybe you'll say that we should apply the rule of Tana Chumre Nakat. That when you are enumerating a list of arayos, as is the case in our Mishnah, you should start with the most severe erva relationship and then go on to the less severe one. So you go min hachamur down to the kal. It's a downward arrow because you start with the most severe avera of erva, and then you go down to the less severe avera of erva. Now, when you talk about creating a hierarchy of chumrah and kula, and this is true not only in arayos but in general in isurim, how do you guide? How do you set up? What's your criteria? For example, if I would tell you that chametz b'Pesach is more chamur than nevela, or if I would tell you that basar b'chalav is more chamur than nevela, what's my criterion? What right do I have to draw that conclusion? What would you say, Ramos? Any intuitive? What?
This one had shear is small.
Excellent. Maybe the shiurim, that could be one method. Although in this case, I don't know that there's different shiurim, but correct. The first stop on my trail should be onish. In the case of chametz, you have karetz. In the case of the vela, you have malchus. Now, if we compare basar b'chalav to the vela, we might say that there's another criterion. Why is basar b'chalav more chamer than the vela? Because it's asur ba'ana. I'm not allowed to feed basar b'chalav to my dog. I can feed nevela to my dog, and that's explicit in the Torah. Like kelev tashlichun also. Now, even though that pasuk appears in treifa, but we derive nevela from treifa. But certainly, as you said, Jeff, the chumras havera in terms of ownership is the best criterion that we can have. Now, how do we decide which onish is more chamer? Clearly, misa, if Bezdin puts you to death, that's more chamer than karetz. However, the complication arises because we're going to see on our list 3 different categories. We're going to have chiyuv misa X, chiyuv misa Y, and then chiyuv kares without misa. So if we're comparing the chiyuv misos, which cover 2 different categories, one is going to be sreifa and the other is going to be skila, then we clearly know that those categories of erva that have a chiyuv misa space are more chamor than those that only generate kares. But within the chiyuv misa categories, then it becomes a lot more complicated. For example, we're going to have a machlokas tanoim with regard to sreifa vis-a-vis skila, which is more chamer. Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that sreifa is more chamer than skila. The Chacham disagree. They hold that skila is more chamer than sreifa. And this is a Mishnah towards the end of Masechet Sanhedrin that records this machlokas. And Reb Shimon, who holds sreifa as kamura, will be very helpful here in explaining our Mishnah. Why? Rabbi Shimon, our Mishnah reflects the sheet of Reb Shimon against the Chachamim. The Amar sreifa chamura, and here you should add the word miskila. And therefore, Bito, his daughter, is going to be first on the list. And why is that? Because the Torah is going to tell us that Bito is a chiyuv sreifa. All right, hopefully we'll get to psukim as we go along, but right now we'll accept it on faith. So if we assume A, that our Mishnah reflects Rabbi Shimon. B, that Rabbi Shimon holds that Sreifa is Chamura Miskila. C, that the Chiyuv for Bito is Sreifa. Then we can apply to our Mishnah this methodological principle that Chamur Kodem Lekal. Now keep in mind that after Bito, in our Mishnah we have Bas Bito, we have Bas Bino, and we have Bas Ishto. Then we have Bas Bino, Bas Bito, and only then, after the Mishnah has exhausted all of the arayas that come from Bito, or his wife's Bas, then the Mishnah picks up Chamoso, which has various tributaries, so to speak. It's got Eim Chamoso, Eim Chamiv. And now we have a very interesting question over here. Although you're right, having quoted Rabbi Shimon, because Bito comes first insofar as the ownership of Sreifa is more chomer than that of Skira. But I got a problem. Why is that? Because the Torah never really spells it out that Bito generates a Chiv Sreifa. The source for Bito in the Torah is Chamosa. Ihachi says, you are listening Chamosa Beresha. Because if you're going back to Torah Shabbat and you want to discover which of the arayas generate a Chiv Sreifa, the only thing you'll find in Torah Shabbat is Chamosa. The Ikar Chamosa, the Ikar Sreifa, the Chamosa Ksiva. And now we quote the Pasuk in Vayikra Chaf. The Pasuk says, Ve'isha sharikach es isha ve'es ima zima hi ba'esh yisrafu oso v'eshen. A man has a relationship with his wife and her mother. And the Torah says explicitly that the chayav sreifa. We know that Bito is also a chayav sreifa, but it doesn't say so in the Torah. It only mentions sreifa in the case of chamosa. However, we're going to derive Bito from chamosa through Gzeira Shava. And as you know, that's Torah Shebal Peh. In Torah Shebal we only have sreifa explicitly mentioned in the case of chamosa. We don't have it in the case of Bito. So therefore, if they both are equal in terms of Chumras HaOnesh, and both Chamosa and Bito generate a Chiv Sreifa, now what are you going to do? You're going to toss a coin, which is going to come first. Now we go back to our intuitive rule that the Melamed comes before the Nilmad. That which appears in the Torah, in the written Torah, will teach us the Torah, and that teaches us the rule. That which is explicit in the Torah is going to be the teacher through the mechanism of, in this case, of the Nilmad. So the Melamed here, which is explicit, is Chamoso, and there the Torah spells out Sreifa. The Nilmad, through the vehicle of Gzeira Shava, is going to be Bito. Then certainly, if they both generate a Chiv Sreifa, so in the parameters of weighing Onshin, they're equal. Now we're going to choose the Melamed over the Nilmad. And therefore, since Chamoso is the source for all the arayos mentioned in Mishnah that generates Sreifa, meaning all the relatives of Chamoso up and down, and all the relatives of Bito, which also generates Sreifa, is then we should be makdim. What should come first is Chamoso, not Bito, because Bito is only a derivative of Chamoso. And the Gemara now has another objection to applying the rule of Chumrah comes first. Basar chamoso lisni kaloso. Now this is a little bit difficult. The Gemara doesn't think that bito and chamoso should be written together, meaning even if, let's say, chamoso would have come before bito in our Mishnah, because chamoso is the melamed and bito is a derivative, nevertheless, the Gemara is convinced that kalaso should come after chamoso. Why is that? The basar sreifa skila chamura. That according to Reb Shimon, on the totem pole of the hierarchy of Chumras Hamisas Bezdin, after Sreifa comes Skila. I mean, the Chacham disagree; they have Skila first and then Sreifa. But according to Reb Shimon, you go from Sreifa down to Skila. That's number 2 on the list. Now, the Torah tells us that the punishment for Kalaso is skila. So therefore, Kalaso should come next. Now, I'm not sure what the Gemara means over here. Does the Gemara mean that Kalaso should come immediately after Chamoso? Before Bito? I mean, Bito is B'Sreifa. So if we're applying the principle of Chomer Kodem, then certainly Bito should come before Kalaso. Kalaso is skila, which according to Reb Shimon is less of a punishment than Sreifa. I think what's going on here, if I read this Gemara correctly, is that the Gemara is pleading on behalf of Bito. Bito is, I'm sorry, scratch that. The Gemara is pleading on behalf of Kalasa. What number on the list is Kalasa in the 15? Don't all answer at once, but anybody?
15.
15. Excellent. It's number 15. So the Gemara now, it's like the bleeding heart liberal for the cause of Kalasa. What does that mean? Because if you go back, after the Mishnah exhausts Bito and Chamaso, all of which are Chayiv Sreifa, then you get to Achoso, various cases of Achoso, and finally Eshes Ishto. I'm sorry, and Achos Ishto. You have Achoso, this sister, that sister, then you have the sister, your wife. And then you have the wife of your brother, right? So that's also Achoso. Now, in all those cases, the Chiyuv is Karetz, not Mises Bezdin. And in the case of Kalasa, which we said is number 15 on the list, you're Chayiv Sreifa. No, I'm sorry, you're Chayiv Skila. So again, the Gemara could justify that Kalaso should come after Chamoso and Bito, because Chamoso and Bito are Sreifa, and according to Rav Shimon, we go down a level when we get to Kalaso, because Kalaso is what? Is Skila. That makes sense. But when the Gemara says that after you exhaust the cases of Sreifa, namely Chamoso and Kalaso, Chamoso and Bito, next should come Kalasa, because Kalasa is a Chiv Skila. And all those that are mentioned in the middle, pushing Kalasa all the way to the bottom of the barrel, they're all Chiv Karetz. But I have a problem, because look at the Gemara's language. The Gemara says, Lisni Kalaso, The basar sreifa skila chamura. Meaning, in the hierarchy of chiyuve misas bezdin, in terms of the chumrah, you drop from sreifa down to skila. And therefore, since kala generates skila, therefore she should be mentioned immediately after the chiyuve sreifa of chamoso and bito. I don't get it. Why does the Gemara have to mention this whole thing of basa sreifa skila chamura? As if to say skila, right? We have hereg and chenek, there are 4 pieces based. So you're telling me that if you go from chamur to kali and you start with, according to Rav Shimon, you start with sreifa, then the next on line, where 3 candidates, we have skila, hereg, and chenek. Skila is next on line. It's number 2, right after sreifa. What's the Gemara need that for? If the Gemara's kasha is to ask why kaloso is last on the list after achoso, achos imo, eish sachi imo, achos ishto, eishes achiv, all that, all of those are kares arayos. I don't have to know where to place Ila in the hierarchy of Arab Mises Bezdin. I've already satisfied my intellectual curiosity as to why Chamoso and Bito are up there on top because of Rabbi Shimon Shita Sreif. Now you know what comes next? Take your choice. Chenek, Hereg, which is Sayed, or Skila. It's irrelevant. I don't have to know how to organize what's number 2 on the list. Basar Sreifa, Skila Chamura. Forget about Skila Chamura. All I need is Mises Bezdin. Because the balance of the arayos that are listed here in the Mishnah before Kalasa, those are Chiyuvei Kares. There's no Mises Bezdin at all. Take a look for a moment at Tosfos, which is about 6 lines up from the bottom of the page. The Labasa Sreifa Skila Chamur. Tosfos says, Bechinam Nakat Hachi. This is totally superfluous and unnecessary. Dafilu Haisa Skila Kala B'chol Mises Bezdin. Therefore, Mises Bezdin put, for my part, says Tosfos, you know what? Put Skila last on the list. Avilin Lemisnik Halaso. He still should have said that Kaloso deserves to be in front of the rest of the list. Basar Chamoso. Chamoso is most common because of Sreifa. Dilachol Hanach, all the balance in the entire list is Leka Misa Elakaris L'chudei. I'm not so happy about this, but I think Tosfos is 100% right. Bechinam Nacha. You follow the logic of Tosfos. There's no rhyme or reason to teach me at this juncture. If we're learning Masechet Sanhedrin and we're trying to set up a hierarchy of all 4 Mises Bezdin, then I have to know that Skila is more common than Hereg and Chenek. But that doesn't interest me. It's not relevant to us here. All I have to know is that we have 3 categories. We have Mises Bezdin of Sreifa. We have Shar Mises Bezdin, whatever they are. In this case, it's Skila. In the case of Kalosa. And then we have Chayvei Krisos. And that's enough to justify the Gemara's kash as to why Kala is placed last on the list. She's a Chiyuv Misa. The rest on the list are all Chiyuvei Kares. So that's called Bechinam Nakat. In the footnote here, in the Mesifta, he quotes a Rashba who says, Shagmara Osifa Sheskila Chamura Kedei Lechazek Es Akusha. In other words, he's adding 1 point to Tosfos to clarify. What do you mean Bechina? It's a chizuk. Meaning, I'm going to show you how much more chomer is kala than all the other achos ishto, etc., by demonstrating that in the hierarchy of Chiyuv Mises Bezdin, kala skila is high up on the list. It's number 2 on the list. Which was the rent a car that said we're number 2? Which one? Hertz or Avis? Avis said
We're number 2.
we try on. We're number 2. Yeah. He embellishes this with a quote from the Aruch LaNer. The Gemara really didn't mean that, even though that's what it says. It says basa straight for skila chamura. El chamura mishar averos. He's adding 2 words to the Gemara. It's basar sreifa, skila chamura mishar arayos. But again, you don't know why the Gemara, according to the Aruch, has to mention skila. It could have said Mises Bezdin mishar. So let's just summarize where we're holding it. At this point, we have a serious problem of justifying the sequence of the Arayos in the Mishnah. If you're going to take the approach of Melamed and Milmad, then Achos Ishto should be first on the list, correct? If you're going to take the approach based on Rabbi Shimon Shita, that Sreifa is going to come first here because we're going to gauge the Chumrah of the Arayos as reflected by the Onshim, then we have 2 problems. Problem number 1 is, why does the Mishnah begin with Bito when Bito itself is a derivative of Chamoso? And number 2, why is Kalaso left to be last on the list when Kalaso is a Chiyuv Mises Bezdin of Skila in this case, and all the rest on the list of the Mishnah are only a Chiyuv Kar. So now the Gemara has to introduce another methodological rule by which we determine the sequence in a list in the Mishnah, and that is Midrasha Chavivo. Now, if you take a look at the Masoras Hashas, number Dalit, which here it's my page on the top left, then you'll find a whole bunch of Gemaras that use this rule of Midrasha Chavivo. He has Baba Basra, Dorim, Nazir, Baba Kamas, Ochim Bechoros, and later on in Masechet Yevamot and in Rosh Hashanah. Okay. Now, Ella says the Gemara, Bito. Why is Bito first? Kevan the Asya Midrasha Chavivo. Now, we have to be a little bit careful here because what does it mean that Bito is Asya Midrasha? I mean, it is true that the Onesh of Sreifa, in the case of Bito, is derived from a drasha. The Erev of Bito, as far as I remember, is explicit in the Torah. I'll read the pasuk to you. It's just that you don't think I'm inventing a pasuk. In Vayikra Yudches, it says, "Ervas isha ubita lo segala." Now that means that you're not allowed to have a relationship with the daughter of your wife. In the case of your own daughter, it goes without saying because she's also the daughter of your wife. So when the Gemara says Asya Midrasha, I think what the Gemara is referring to is the drasha by which we derive the onish streifa in the case of Bita. Because we said that Bito in streifa is derived from Xera Shav. It's not explicit. Only by Chamoso is it explicit. I don't know. Is that what the Gemara has in mind here?
It's not the.
Is the Gemara saying that the Onesh is not explicit? It's derived from Xeret Shava in the case of Bito. And therefore, Bito should be first on the list. Now the plot goes thicker because if we turn now to Daf Gimel and Alf, I don't understand the next line of the Gemara either. The Gemara says, "Kulu nami midrasha." Now this can't be taken literally, Rabbosai, because there's a whole parsha of arayos. And the arayos that are mentioned in that Mishnah are mentioned in the Torah. They're not derived from a drasha. If you take a look at Rashi, so Rashi on the bottom of Daf Beis Amud Beis, Keva the Asya Midrasha li Aser Ol. So Rashi is telling us that Bito is as an Erev, li Aser Ol, is derived from a drasha. I will have to understand that Rashi. And on the top of Daf Gimel, Rashi says, Kulo nami midrasha, le'inyan tur yibu midrasha asya, me'achos isha. Now it's coming a little closer, because all the arayos are explicit in the Torah, but what we need a drasha for is to tell me that even in a situation of yibum, those arayos still generate an isur, and there's no mitzvah of yibum to override those arayos, and that in fact is derived from achos isha, as we saw before. So Rabbosai, how do I know that an erva doesn't fall for yibum? If my brother's wife is an erva on me, right? And the answer is we derive it from achos isha. And that gives it a chavivus. So the Gemara is asking, why are you telling me that Bito comes first in our Mishnah? Because it's derived from a drasha. Well, I got news for you, says the Gemara. All the arayos are derived from a drasha. And in the Masechet he fleshes it out. He says, Makar ptur erva miyibum hu me eleha. Right? We said that lo sikach isha. What was the pasuk again? I'll read it out loud. Lo isha el achosa lo sikach litzar legalos ervasa oleha. So from that word oleha, in achos isha mimeno anu lemeidim l'chol arayis shepturos u'potus torasei min hayibum shehukshu elea kol arayis kula. So there's a hekesh between all the arayos and achos isha. Bim came, says the Gemara, Choseres hakushel v'kom madu ekdima mishnas bito lechamoso v'lo kol makar onesh bito u'michamosa. So the fact that you get streifa in the case of bito is derived from exertion from chamoso. The ain lomar should be shum shemakar iser bito. Umidrasha reu chaviv yoser rakenik dimasa mishnah shalom shal alo makom tur kol arayis afhu midrasha sa hekesh amur the afchamoso bichlal v'me'adifa bito oleo. Wow, this is complicated. This is complicated. So we're up to Kulu Nami Midrasha Os. What we know is that Rashi is telling us that the Ptur Erva in Yibum in all the Arayas is derived from the word Aleha in Achos Isha. So now we have to scratch our answer to the question as to why the Mishnah starts with Bito So we said that Bito is derived from a drasha, and if it's Chavim, correct? But now we're saying, wait a minute, all the Arayas are derived from a drasha, at least in the context of the Hebrew. So why is Bito first on the list? You're going to tell me because we derive from a drasha. All the Arayas are derived from a drasha. So, for example, if you were to ask why Chamaso doesn't fall for Yibum, I'm going to have to invoke a drasha by which we compare all the Arayos. The paradigmic erva, as far as the Tur Yibum, is going to be Achos Ishto. And in that pasuk, the Torah says Aleha. And therefore, I'm going to derive that through a drasha that all the Arayos are Turos Min Yibum. So, for example, Chamoso. Chamoso is, like any other erva, going to be derived, as far as the Tur Yibum is concerned, from Achos Isha. You're telling me that Bito comes first on the list because it's derived from a drasha. Chamoso, which comes second, is also derived from a drasha. Because all the Arayas are derived from a drasha as far as the Tur Yibum is concerned. So why should Bito come before Chamoso? See, there are two drashas. The drasha of Bito is as far as the Onesh Streif is concerned. Right? There's Xeris Shava between Bito and Chamoso. Just like the Torah says, in Chamoso there's a Chiv Streif. So in Bito, by virtue of Xeris Shava between Bito and Chamoso, Bito also genders a Chiv Streif. So that puts Bito on a special level because it's Chavivale, because it's derived from a drush. But guess what? Almost every single erev on this list is derived from a drush, because the whole point of our Mishnah is Chamesh Esrei Noshim Potro Turos and Potros Soros Emin Ayibum. That halach is derived from a drush. the Melamed is Achos Ishto. But all the other arayas are derived from a Hekish Achos Ishto. So if you're looking for that extra mila, that special, shall I say, yichus here, and you're going to tell me, well, Kaloso, I'm sorry, Bito has a special yichus because its Kiyuv Sreifa is derived from a drasha. Well, every single one of the arayas has that yichus. Is derived from a drasha because the halacha that's formulated in our Mishnah is not the Iser Erva per se, but rather the P'tur Yibum. That's the subject of our Mishnah. The P'tur Yibum, in all cases except for one, is a derivative of a drasha. So each one of the arayas can come and boast, wear a 5-minute cap, and say, well, I'm derived from a drasha, so I have this element of chashivas and chavivas that I should come first.
They're saying the arayah of Bito is also.
Well, again, in the case of Bito, what you do have something unique because the Chiv Sreif on Bito is derived from a drasha, it's a Reshama to Chamos.
But they're saying too that even just the arayah is a drasha.
That's what Rashi seems to say. Rashi says, Keva the Asya Midrasha, Rashi says, Li Aser Ol. I'm trying to avoid what I know is coming around the bend. There are two categories of Bito. There's one Bito in a marriage relationship. In other words, he's married to her and they have a daughter. There's another Bito where he rapes a woman. That's called Bito Me'anusasa. And the Bito Me'anusasa is not explicit in the Torah. That's going to be derived from a drasha. The Torah says you're not allowed to have relations with the daughter of your wife. And that teaches me your own daughter because your own daughter is also the daughter of your wife. But it doesn't teach me your own daughter in the case of a rape situation. So that's probably what Rashi has in mind. Again, I'm giving you a preview of coming attractions. I didn't want to mention this because I didn't want to let the cat out of the bag prematurely. But that's probably what Rashi has in mind here when he says the Isser of Bito is derived from a drasha. But again, even though the Isser Bito is derived from a drasha, in Bito Me'anam Saso, that just gives Bito a certain plus. But if that same plus, we'll call it a Mila, could apply to all the other arayas, then we still really haven't justified why Bito is first on the list. Now, since the context of our mission is not just the Isser Erva per se, but as Rashi says here on the top of that, Gimel the P'tur Yibum, here all the arayas have that mile, again with the exception of Achos Ishto, which is the Melamed from which we derive that conclusion. You know what I'm thinking out of the box now for a second? It could be even Achos Ishto has that mile, because it doesn't say in the parsha of Achos Ishto that she doesn't fall for Yibum. In the case of Yibum, it says the word Oleha, Yevamot Yavo Oleha. And that word Aleh appears in the Iser Erva Parsha, in Achrei Mos, in the context of Achos Ishto. So we have Achos Ishto, even if there's there's a Yibum situation, but that itself is a drasha. Nowhere does it say in the Torah explicitly that Achos Ishto does not fall for Yibum. So let me just read this again and see if we're on the right track. Again, I'm reading it a second time around. The Gemara says the following: Ku nami midrasha asu shemakar p'tur erva shehu me'oleh eno omer ela b'chos isha u'bemela on a lemedim kol arayis p'turos min ha'yibum. Lefisha hukshu a leo is a hekish to achos ishto kol arayos kula. It came. Ozeres kusha limkom. Madua hikdima Mishnah es bito lechamoso. Madua hikdima Mishnah es bito lechamoso. Truth is, we had two kashas. The Gemara had kaloso. Why is kaloso at the end of the list? And then we had another kasha. Why is bito before chamosa? Again, nachamo. Bito and chamoso are both a chiyuv sreifa. And bito is derived from chamoso. So the Gemara thinks that chamoso should come before bito. And now we're saying that even if all the arayos are potter from yibum based on a drasha, we still don't understand why bito comes before chamosa. They both have a chiyuv sreifa, and adarabba bito is derived from chamosa, and chamosa sreifa is explicit. So since the death of sreifa is a punishment, in the case of bito is a derivative of chamosa, chamosa should come first. Is that correct? Yeah, v'chitema, the Gemara had said on Beis Amid Beis, the Tana chumrei naki, and Reb Shimoni, blah blah blah. Ihachi listei chamosa bereisha to ikar sreifa b'chamosa. The Torah writes the sreifa chamosa. So bito is a derivation of chamosa. And the Gemara therefore thinks chamosa should come before bito. And then the Gemara adds another kasha, another fuel to the flame, and that is what do we do with kaloso? Why is kaloso, which is a chiyuv skila, after all the chiyuve kares in the Mishnah? So now we're saying that the Mishnah has bito first, because bito has a mila of chavivus. But if I prove to you that all arayos in the Mishnah, each one of them has that mila of chavivus, then I'm going back to the drawing board, and I don't understand why bito appears before chamosa, because the compelling logic of chamosa coming before bito is because bito is a derivative of chamosa. Ella, what you're going to tell me that adarabba, the fact that bito is a derivative from chamosa, that gives it kedima, and that's why it comes first because of chavivale. Well, then all the arayos are chavivale. So we can't operate within the framework of chavivale. And we're back to asking the question, why chamoso comes after bito. Chamoso, as the paradigmic sreifa case, should come before bito, because bito is a derivative. And now we have the second question, which still bothers us, and that is, why is kaloso at the end of the list? After all, if you're dealing with onshim, then kaloso is a chiyuv misas bezdin, albeit not sreifa, but at least it's skila. So that's what we have here. Now he adds a note here. He says, "B'Torah lo nichta beferish iser bito." Right? Rashi said that bito is first on the list because of chavivus. Why is chavivus? Because the iser bito is not derived from the Torah. It's not written in the Torah. He says, "Bito b'nisu also." If a man is married to a woman and they have a child, a girl, nichleles be'iser bas ishto hamafurish b'Torah, then his own daughter is included in his wife's daughter, and that's explicit in the Torah. Shenemar erbas icho bito lo segala. Then it says zimoin, But in the case of Bito Me'anu Saso, Eino Bichlal Iser Bas Ishto, she's not the daughter of your wife because the relationship here was out of wedlock. It's Anu Saso. So Iser Bito Me'anu Saso, Eino Bichlal Iser Bas Ishto. So that explains the next answer to the Gemara. Asyon Midrasha. You're right that all the arayos on the list in our Mishnah have, each one has that mila, that it's derived from a drasha in the P'tur Yibum. But Ikar Isure Behejek Simbahu. But the Isur itself is explicit in the Torah. But Bito, in the case of Anu Saso, Ikar Isura Midrasha. The Omar Rav, Omar Ab Yitzchak, Barav Dime, Asya Heina. Again, so we're not going to get into Heina, that's a sugya. But what we do know is that the Ikar Iser in the case of Bito Me'anu Saso is derived from Heina, from a drasha. Is Mebele, I understand that Bito comes first. Then I would say Chamoso comes second because of the chumrah of the avera that generates sreifa. But do we know why Kala is last on the list? That I don't know. Because the Gemara asks, Kala has the chumrah of Misas Bezdin. That's the way Tosfos explained the Gemara. So Kala should certainly have come before the Chiyuv Karetz. So it seems to me, I mean, if you think I'm wrong, please don't be embarrassed to tell me. I'll think it over again tonight. But it seems to me the Gemara has adequately addressed the issue of why Bito comes before Chamosa, but it hasn't yet addressed the issue of why Kala is at the end of the Mishnah, end of the list. Okay then? So we'll stop here. I'm just going to make a note of where we got up to. This is just a challenge of plowing through the Gemara. It seems that the way the Talmud Bavli operates, it's very important to the Talmud to understand the Seder and the Mishnah. It's worth spending a whole black Gemara just to try to justify the Seder and the Mishnah. Okay then? Thank you so much. Have a great day.